Welcome back, everyone. For today's video, we are going to be taking a look at a game that was played in the Titled Tuesday event this morning of March 19th. Now, there's been a lot of drama over the last couple of years featuring players like myself, Magnus Carlsen, Hans, Niemann, and others. But today we get a big matchup with Magnus Carlsen playing against Hans in the, I believe, 7th round of Titled Tuesday. So Magnus and Hans are meeting. They have played once more recently in Titled Tuesday where they did draw their game, but today they are playing once again. So Magnus with the white pieces, Hans with the black pieces, and the game starts out with the move e4. After e4, we got the move c5 from Hans. Now, Hans, of course, has been playing a lot of things. Their previous Titled Tuesday game ended in a draw in the classic Berlin defense with knight c6, bishop b5, knight f6, etc. But today, Hans decides to play c5 as he's trying to be a hero and win against Magnus. We get knight to f3. Now we get d6. We have d4. C takes d4. Knight takes d4. Knight f6. Knight c3 and a6. Now this, of course, is what is known as the classic Najdorf system within the Sicilian defense. It was essayed by the former American world champion, someone who accomplished this feat long before Hans could even dream of it, Bobby Fischer. So after a6, we now get the move bishop to e3, with e5 being played here by Hans. You could play knight to g4. You could play e6 as well. Generally, e5, e6, and knight g4 are the three most common moves. So we get e5. Now we have knight to f3, we get bishop to e7, we have bishop to c4 being played here by Magnus. What we have is a very positional system where white is trying to take advantage of this weak square on d5 where he can pop either a bishop or a knight. Additionally, black has this backwards pawn on d6. If black could get rid of this pawn and push d5, black would be doing very well. So for somebody like Magnus, he really does like these positional grinding positions. I feel like I've seen Magnus play this probably at least like a good 20 to 30 times in the past. We get castles, and now we have bishop e6. Magnus decides to trade the bishops here, and Hans gets the double pawns on e5 and e6. So black has double pawns here, but there are some merits to this position. First of all, black can play for d5 to get rid of this weakness. Say you have a move like, let's just say h3, and black goes d5. Black has this bit, what we call the big black center here, and black is pushing pawns up the board. If white trades, actually, I guess here it doesn't quite work, but just to illustrate, let's say you get knight c6, a3, and d5, just so the point stands. Now, after takes, the knight guards e5. You have the two pawns in the center of the board, and black is doing very well. So, black is trying to push for d5, but additionally, white loses the d5 square for the knight as the pawn on e6 prevents the move. So, we get knight to a4 from Magnus here. Now we have knight fd7. Hans trying to stop white from jumping to the b6 square with the horse. Magnus now plays c4, and we start to see why Magnus put the knight on the rim, which is that now with the pawns on c4 and e4, white is preventing black from playing d5, which means that black is left with a slightly weak pawn on d6. Now we get knight to c6. Magnus plays rook c1. We get b6 here, trying to stop white from playing c5, and now we have queen to b3. Hans plays rook to b8, guarding the pawn on b6 against the capture, and now Magnus plays this move c5. After c5 is played here by Magnus, Hans decides to play knight takes pawn with knight d7 takes c5. We get knight takes knight, pawn takes knight, queen takes e6, and now king to h8. So material is evened out here. Both sides have the same number of pawns on the board. But on the other hand, there are some issues. Black now has these really ugly pawns on c5, d6, and e5 here. You can't really push d5. You can't push c4. And so Magnus is trying to argue these pawns are weak. On the other hand, however, black does have a juicy square on d4 here for the horse, which is covered by the two pawns on c5 and e5. So we get b3 played by Magnus. Hans plays knight to d4. We get bishop takes knight, pawn takes knight, and now this move e5 is played. What Magnus is trying to do here is he's trying to get Hans to trade the pawns on e5, because now this knight can jump to d3 and pressure the pawn on c5. You can also go to c4, and with all these weak pawns in the center of the board and on a6, combined with threats like knight f7, it looks very clear that white will have a big advantage, if not go on to win the game. So, in this position, after e5, we get d5 being played here by Hans. He's trying to stop Magnus from jumping with the knight. Additionally, it's a very solid idea because black wants to push for c4 and d3 down the road. After d5, we get the move queen to g4 for Magnus. Hans plays rook to b4 with the idea of d3 to attack the queen laterally. After rook b4, well, I messed it up. Didn't mean to do that. Nice. Spoiler alert. I hit the wrong button. I hit the forward instead of the back forward button, but we keep going because that's how we do our recaps. No restarting or anything like that. So after rook b4, we get to move rook fd1 being played here by Magnus, and now we have queen to e8 being played here by Hans, and now queen to e6. Now, after queen to e6, it looks like Magnus has a very small advantage here because the pawns are a little bit weak on d5 and a6, but Hans plays the move queen to f7 here, which is a move that I actually really like in this position because black can play for c4 or g5, g4 here. So after queen to f7, we get queen takes queen, rook takes queen, and now Magnus goes knight e1. What we're looking for here, if you're looking at it from Magnus's perspective, is he's trying to go after these weak pawns. If black were to push c4, white can always take this pawn on d4. If you play a move like h6, for example, now there's knight to d3, hitting both the rook on b4 and the pawn on c5. So we get the move g5 here from Hans, knight d3, rook to b5, and now Magnus goes g3. So Magnus figures here that now black cannot push these pawns. If you go c4, I will just take, and win the pawn on c4 and win the game. Additionally, white wants to try and build this chain of 4, the classic connect 4 here, from h2 to g3 to f4 to e5 here, and try to use these two pawns on the e and f files to go up the board. So here we have the move king to g7, and now Magnus plays e6. We get rook to f8, a4, rook takes b3 is played, and now knight takes c5. Now you're probably wondering, I just said the idea is f4, why didn't Magnus play f4? Well, if Magnus were to play f4 here right away after pawn takes pawn, computer gives white a small edge with knight takes pawn going after the pawn on d5, but black has ideas like bishop g5, for example, to try and pin the knight. There are ideas like down the road like rook f5 to go after the pawn, and if white plays the more classic approach with pawn takes pawn, now after king g6, king g2, king f5, king f3, and let's just say a move like a5, there are no threats with rook g1 and rook g5 because the bishop covers the square and guards the pawn on c5 at the same time. And after a4 here with no check on g5, the black king on f5 is very, very well placed, and black is threatening to break through on the queen side here, and it's very likely that Magnus would have lost the game if this occurred. So instead, we get e6. Now we get rook f8, a4, rook takes b3, knight c5, and now Hans plays the move rook c3. Now, Hans has found some really, really good defensive moves in this middle game here. He's very close to equalizing, and it seems like the task is pretty much over. But of course, Hans is playing against Magnus Carlsen, the greatest player of all time, and Magnus is always trying to keep the game going. So we got knight takes pawn on a6. Now Hans plays rook f8, a very, very good move as well here because Hans wants Magnus to trade the rooks on c3 because then you would undouble the pawns, and black is pushing p up the board here, and black will win the game very soon with these two central pawns. So we get the move rook fb1, or rook cb1 I should say, being played by Magnus. Now Hans plays d3 here, trying to use this pawn here, but additionally you'll notice that this knight on a6 is very much out of play. It's on the rim, does not have squares to jump to here. The bishop is dominating the knight, and now we get the move king g2. Hans plays rook a8 c4, trying to go after the pawn and further prove just how bad this knight on a6 is, as it just can't go anywhere in a hurry. So we get to move a5. Hans plays rook to a3, which is apparently a mistake here. Computer wanted this move king f6, a very, very quiet move. And I think the reason is that now if white plays something like rook b5, black can simply take the pawn on e6 and guard the pawn on d5. Whereas in the game after rook to a3, I thought there was rook b5, but apparently the computer wants rook b7, king f6, and now knight c7, because you're hitting the pawn on d5 with the knight. If black takes to guard, rook takes d3, and this pawn on d5 is very weak. White has ideas, let's just say d4 of rook f3, king e5, and knight e8 here. And now suddenly this bishop on e7 is very, very weak. The knight's going to g7, there's rook f5, and white probably should win the game. Now, obviously, I'm going through this a little bit quickly here, but the computer, as you can see from the bar, does give white a significant advantage. So instead of getting rook b7, or no, we do get this, sorry. Instead of getting this whole line, after knight c7, we get the move bishop to c5 being played here by Hans, and now Magnus plays the move rook to e1. Now, rook to e1 is a move that is apparently not the best move here. The computer says that after e7, white is winning on the spot. And the reason that white is winning on the spot is that if black takes with the bishop, there's now knight takes pawn, forking the king and the bishop, and after king e6, knight takes e7, white simply has an extra horse and will win the game. If black doesn't take the pawn, let's just say you play, I don't know, rook a2, white queens the pawn, you take on f2, and then I go king h1 here. Not king to h3, by the way, because then g4 would actually lead to a forced checkmate with king h4 and rook takes h2 checkmate. So after e7, you got to take. If you don't take with the bishop, the only other way is with the king, and then it's time for spaghetti-o. There's knight b5, creating the classic fossil here, where you check the king with the rook, and after the king moves, you snap this rook on a3, and after takes, white has 2 rooks versus a rook and a bishop. White also has an a pawn to push up the board, and the rest will be very, very straightforward. So, in this position, Magnus instead plays rook to e1, missing the idea of e7. We get to move d2 here, and now we have knight takes d5, king to f5, and now rook to d1 is played. Now, computer, again, doesn't like rook to d1. It wants white to go for the tickle check first with rook f7, king g6, and then rook d1, because now the king is cut off by 1 extra row. In this position after rook to d1, the king can capture on e6 or go to e4 here, and the king is definitely an active piece in the endgame. So we get rook to d1, rook to d3 played here. Now Magnus plays e7. We get rook to e4. And here we have this move rook to b8, which is a huge blunder by Magnus. Now this move essentially throws away the win, and the game should end in a draw. Now it's very uncharacteristic from Magnus, maybe feeling the pressure of playing against Hans Niemann, who's going to become the first American world champion. Perhaps just very unsure of himself, and he makes the mistake. Now this is a surprising mistake because Magnus does have 18 seconds on the clock here, but such is life. Now the computer wants to move rook to d7 here, and one thing that maybe Magnus needs to study a little bit more of is this great concept of the fossil. Now the fossil, also known as the discovered attack, really important concept to know here, because if black plays rook e2 trying to win the pawn on f2, there are now a couple ways for white to win. Probably the one that I would recommend is something simple like queen, actually not queen, sorry, I thought knight e3 was queen, but I was winning, but queen takes, and knight, actually wait, knight e7 doesn't work. Wait a second, I'm talking too quickly before I calculate. I was going to say queen takes knight e7, creating the fossil, but there is king to e4, which guards the rook, and now black is okay. But I do believe that after rook d7, rook e2, is it knight to e3? Wait, there's the way to win. Wait, knight e3, black takes. No, it's tricky still. Maybe I'm wrong. So the move the computer wants is g4 here, creating the fossil the other way, because after king g4, now there's knight f6, hitting the king and the rook. And if black goes king g6, now you have knight to f4, fossilizing the king and the 2 rooks with the classic family fork. So, as I said, I started to make fun of Magnus a little bit, but as you see, it's not quite as simple as you would think. And g4 is a very tricky move to find here, because the moves that you consider are the moves that I actually mentioned, which are knight to e3 or e8 queen. Now, as my chat is saying, 2400 level analysis kappa. Obviously, I've not looked at this game in advance. We're looking at this game fresh for the first time. And I think it's much more authentic when you do approach it that way, because if I were to say, look at this game for 20 minutes, then do a recap, I appear to be some super genius, some superhuman guy who knows all the lines perfectly. That's just not really authentic, and that's not how we do our YouTube videos. So in this position, after rook to e4, we get rook to b8 being played by Magnus. We have bishop takes e7, knight takes bishop, rook takes, and now we have the move rook b2. Hans goes rook a7, and now we get this massive trade of the rooks on d2, and rook takes a5 here. And now we're in an endgame where it's 3 pawns versus 2. Now the general theory as it goes about endgames is that if you have an extra pawn but they're all on the same side of the board, the game should be a draw. So Hans Niemann, going to be the future American world champion, so surely he'll be able to draw what is known as the textbook theoretical drawn endgame. So we get rook to d7, and now we have h5 being played here, rook d6, g4. We're going to go through a lot of moves very quickly here. We get this critical position with a lot of dilly-dallying, as we like to say, where the players are moving pieces all over the board. Not a whole lot happening, but as we know with Magnus Carlsen is obviously a player who's going to continue to play on until there are bare kings left on the board. So the game keeps going on. A lot of checks here. It looks like Hans has defended completely. He's going to draw the game until finally we get this move f4. So the players have played something like 20 plus moves. We've had no progress, just a lot of checks, kings going all over the place, and now we get the move f4. Hans plays end peasant with g takes f3. I don't know if I would have played end peasant personally. Honestly, I want to say that rook to a2, king f1, king f5, rook e3, and something like rook a5, or even king g6 is probably, in my opinion, a little bit easier of a draw than going for end peasant. That being said, end peasant is completely fine as well. So whether we have the modern rules or with the rules from over 500 years ago, the result should still be the same. So we get g takes f3. We get king takes f3, rook a4, rook b6, check, king g7, rook b5, king g6, rook g5, king h6. More dilly-dallying, by the way. Much more dilly-dallying, I should say. A lot of checks. Players keep moving all over the board once again. We get this position. And here, Hans Niemann now plays the inexplicable blunder, king to f6. Now, Hans said that this was a mouse slip. I am inclined to believe that this was a mouse slip because this move simply hangs the pawn on h5. If Hans had played king g6 here, guarding the pawn on h5, the game would once again be a draw as usual. But we get king to f6 from Hans, and now Magnus misses Magnus does not miss his opportunity here. He decides to play the move rook takes h5, and now we have 2 pawns on the king side, the h and g pawns. So white has a rook and 2 versus a rook, and now all of the dreams, everything are gone for Hans. Hans' idea of making a draw, staying in contention to win the tournament, are gone with the mouse slip. So after rook takes h5, we get king g6. The rest is pretty straightforward, so I won't go super in depth. We get rook g5, rook e5. Magnus eventually now starts pushing the pawns up the board with g4. 2 connected pawns. We get rook b4, king f5, rook b5, rook to e5, and now we have the move rook to b7. Here we have the move h5. Hans plays rook f7. We get king g5, rook g7, king h4, rook b7, and now Magnus plays rook e4. Now, this is a very stylish move. It's not the only move required. You could push g5, but Magnus is not taking any risks whatsoever. So by going rook e4, no checks on the 4th rank now because the rook covers it, and you're just going to go g5 on the next move. So we get rook b5. We now have rook to e7. Hans plays king g8, not king h6, by the way, because then white can sack the pawn with g5 checking the king. Rook takes pawn, rook e6 check, and after the king moves and you take the rook, is GG, why not? So we get king to g8 being played. Magnus now plays the move h6, king h8. We get g5, rook b6, king h5, trying to push g6 here. We have the move, or actually after king h5, Hans decides to resign the game. I'll give you guys a short line of why he resigned. If you go rook c6 here, white can actually win with rook e8, but let's just say you didn't have this rook e8 g6 concept. After g6, rook c8, the way that white wins here with the pawns on g6 and h6 is to not play the move h7. Now, Ding Liren, the current world chess champion, I believe in a game against Vidit Santosh Gujarati in a Tata Steel event in India maybe 2 years ago, maybe it's 3 years ago or more now, accidentally pushed the pawn on the other side of the board, and he allowed a stalemate trick with rook c5, king h6, and rook to h5. But, of course, Magnus Carlsen, the former world champion, would probably not make this mistake. And the way that you win here is to not push h7. The way you win with no tricks is bring this king slowly over to the queen side. So, for example, say you go check, I go back, threaten mate in 1. Rook back, I bring the king closer. Let's say you play rook a8. Now I'm going to go, let's just say rook to c7, bring the rook over, rook b8, and slowly but surely, after check, king c6, if black ever goes rook g8, there's always rook h7, checkmating the king. And after rook to e8, you now go king b7 with the idea of rook c8 to exchange the rooks. So you basically make sure you leave the pawns here, you make sure you always can mate, and then you slowly walk the king up the board, you trade the rooks on c8, and then of course you bring your king all the way back here. Something like this, king h7, king here. Actually, king g8 would be simpler. h7 takes here, here, queen, here, here, and queen h4 would be checkmate. So after king to h5, Hans Niemann resigns the game. Definitely unfortunate. In this case, it's a little bit hard to be super critical of Hans because I do believe that king f6 was a mouse slip. If he had played king to g6, the game would have been a draw. But mouse slips are a part of the game. As my chat has told me, it's simply a skill issue. So if you don't have the skills, that's just how it goes. And sometimes you, unfortunately, lose games like that. I myself have also lost some games to mouse slips, but it means that Magnus Carlsen gets a very, very important win over Hans Niemann. I think it's his first win since that fateful event in St. Louis back in September of 2022. So Magnus got the win in this game. Now Magnus would lose, I believe, in the following round against none other than Denis Lazovic, and he would not go on to win the tournament. I actually struggled quite a bit too. I lost the eventual winner, Buddy Pranav. But this game between Magnus and Hans is always a premier event. Everybody's always curious to see what happens when they face each other in the few and far between games that occur in the present world. But Magnus comes out on top in this one, and he does show why he is still such a great chess player. So, on that note, I hope you guys have enjoyed this recap of the game played between Hans Niemann and Magnus Carlsen from the Title Tuesday morning edition here on March 19th of the great year 2024. If you like my content or you're not already subscribed to the channel, make sure that you smash that subscribe button below, and we will be back soon with some more great YouTube-only videos. See you guys. Bye.